This is Daniel Messier.
Duncan O'Rourke.
Stella Henry.
Hello and welcome back to the Congress Pod, your home for all things Congress and all discussions related to politics. So today we are going to be talking about a lot of different issues, but I think we're going to start with Duncan talking about the constitutional amendment process.
How's it going today? Duncan O'Rourke here. So today I'll be talking about the constitutional amendment process and really in the context of the Equal Rights Amendment, which has been in the news recently and has actually over history since 1926 been a major possible amendment to the Constitution. So the last amendment was in 1922, the 27th, and that just changed the rate of compensation for members of Congress to take effect after the election. It hasn't been amended in a while, so it can always change, though.
Yeah.
So the authority to actually amend the Constitution is derived from Article 5 of the Constitution. After Congress proposes said amendment, the Constitution provides that amendment may be proposed either by Congress with a 2/3 majority vote in both the House and Senate. The Constitution provides that amendment may be proposed either by Congress with a 2/3 majority vote in both the House and Senate. And then back really to the Equal Rights Amendment, it would, a little fleshing out of what it is, it would clarify the legal status of sex discrimination for the courts.
Okay.
Where decisions still deal inconsistently with these such claims. For the first time, sex would be considered a suspect classification, such as race currently is. Governmental action. So this is a quote from the actual legislation proposed in 1926, actually. Governmental actions that treat males or females differently as a class would be subject to strict judicial scrutiny and would have to meet the highest level of justification, a necessary relation to a compelling state interest, to be upheld as constitutional. To those who try to write, enforce, or adjudicate laws inequitably, the ERA would send a strong preemptive warning. The Constitution has no tolerance for sex discrimination under the law. So the ERA has been around for a while, but it has never actually got through as being an amendment, as I've said. But I guess closest to it would be Joe Biden pushed for the Violence Against Women Act.
Right, yeah.
In 94, which passed in 94,
yeah.
And this provided over $1.5 billion towards investigation and prosecution of violent crimes against women. It imposed automatic and mandatory restitution on those convicted and allowed civil redress in cases prosecutors chose to leave unprosecuted. And the act also established the Office on Violence Against Women within the Department of Justice. So, as you saw, everything is seemingly going in the right direction towards this amendment, but there's a long history behind it.
Right.
It was ratified by 35 of the 38 states needed. But in 1976, there was a massive anti-ERA act, actually brought on mostly by women who were scared of, or would not like to be drafted, and
interesting.
Yeah, which was the main thing back then. But there were a few other reasons that.
Right. I mean, it was the 70s, right?
You're right.
So that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it ended up being shut down basically nationwide, with only 35 of the 38 states ratifying it. So it has not got through. But an interesting thing is that it was actually just brought up in committee in Virginia to possibly bring that back into contention.
Okay.
And then lastly, I just have a quote from the late Judge Antonin Scalia.
Yep.
That says, "Certainly the Constitution does not require discrimination on the basis of sex.
Mm-hmm.
The only issue is whether it prohibits it. It doesn't."
Awesome.
And
very interesting. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and discuss this a little further.
I have an annuity, but I need cash now. Call J.G. Wentworth, 877-CASH now. 877-CASH now. 877-CASH now. 877-CASH now. Call now.
Welcome back. We're talking about the constitutional amendment process and the Equal Rights Act. And we're going to start. I think Stella has a question for Duncan.
Yes, I do. So, I've definitely heard of the Equal Rights Amendment, but I used to think that it was just sort of a general, like, equal rights amendment. Like it was just about, like, equal rights in general. So was it just about the treatment of women, or was it also about the treatment of minorities and other groups?
Right. That's a good question. So it is mostly about genders and treatment of women, I would say. Trying to get the equal legal status to all men, and most of the Constitution, even though most people would not know that, they do not. And it's not egregious things. It's mostly small things, but it's very inconsistent, and that's why they want to clean it up a bit, I guess. And it would clarify the legal status of sex discrimination.
Yep.
And as I said before, it would consider sex as a suspect classification in court, as race currently is.
Still, do you think there should be more than just women included, or do you think that should be a separate bill, maybe?
Well, I mean, if they're going to call it the Equal Rights Amendment, equal rights doesn't just apply to females, like, I don't know, I just think the name is kind of misleading because, it's not like the Violence Against Women Act where, it's, basically just about women.
Right.
Women. Yeah, I mean, maybe if they had it, but you know what? If they had included, other minorities, if they had, made the bill, made the amendment about minorities as well, I don't think that necessarily would have made it any more likely for it to be passed, because then it just would have been that there just would have been more objections, because there naturally would have come with more controversies.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe that would be too broad, because amendments, sometimes the broader they are, the harder they are to pass.
Yeah.
They're already so hard to pass as it is.
Right. So do we think it's a good thing or a bad thing that amendments are hard to pass? Do we think that it would be good to change that system, or?
Personally, I think it's a positive thing. I think it's a good thing, probably, that it takes a while. It takes majority of the country and majority of the Senate as well.
No, I would agree with that. I think, obviously you can't take amending the Constitution lightly, and this might be an instance where it would be beneficial, but I think overall it's still good to have that barrier there, or that obstacle to amending it.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think it could definitely go both ways. I think it's good that there are barriers in place to prevent because if they made it too easy to pass an amendment, that could be really harmful. But at the same time, the Constitution is a living, breathing document. It's not meant to be, static. And so the fact that, it's so, the last amendment was so long ago, and, it's just, it's just a lot of people argue that we shouldn't necessarily be going off a document that was written hundreds of years ago and that has barely been changed since, because the world has and our country has changed so much, and so it goes both ways. Like in some instances it's like a good thing, in some instances it's not.
Right. Awesome. So that's definitely something to think about. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk about Congress's role in foreign affairs and foreign policy.
Hey, welcome back to the Congress Pod. We're going to be talking about foreign policy and the No First Use Act.
So this is Dan here. I am going to be talking about, basically, there's an article that was published on October 16th of 2017 by Stephen J. Brams of the Washington Post, and it sort of outlines ways that the United States situation with North Korea could be possibly improved in terms of nuclear arms. And the main point that the article makes is that something that could be very helpful to de-escalate maybe and to prevent any catastrophes from happening in the United States relations with North Korea is to basically have some sort of clarity over what would trigger the use of nuclear arms, basically, and what would have to happen in terms for one of the countries to launch their nuclear weapons. So, in light of that, when I sort of saw this article from a couple of years ago, maybe more towards the beginning of Trump's presidency, I wanted to look at sort of some of the bills that are being brought about now, and the movement that sort of has come from this sort of idea that was brought about in this article about the no first use, because there has been a movement to basically have a no first use bill. It's been brought up by Senator Elizabeth Warren. It's Senate Bill 272 to establish the policy of the United States regarding the no first use policy of nuclear weapons. And on her website, it pretty much just says that the idea is basically that the United States doesn't initiate a nuclear war, right? That we don't launch nukes unless Congress has declared war, or we've been attacked first with nuclear weapons. That's a part of her bill, I think, too, is that it has to be nuclear weapons, because currently the way that it works is that technically using nuclear weapons is just it's an act of war, and the president can do that without declaring war, technically, because of the way that his powers work. He can just kind of has the authority to do that and kind of go over Congress's heads with that, which is a huge power to give him.
Right.
So obviously this would not only be a check on foreign policy, but it would be a check on the president as well, on his sort of powers to levy nuclear weapons. And about this bill, Senator Warren said, "Our current nuclear strategy is not just outdated, it is dangerous. By making clear that the deterrence is the sole purpose of our arsenal, this bill would reduce the chances of a nuclear miscalculation and help us maintain our moral and diplomatic leadership in the world." So I thought this was really interesting in terms of Congress sort of asserting power over foreign policy and over the presidency, and it was related also to an article written by DeLayton Scott called "Arms Control and the U.S. Senate," in which they sort of talk about the idea of the old adage, politics stops at the water's edge, meaning that the sort of arguments and the salient issues that we have in our country, which is on most issues, I feel like we're always fighting about something, but it stays domestic, is the idea of politics stopping at the water's edge. Is that once you get into international waters, we are all Americans, and we all can agree on how we should act. But the argument that DeLayton Scott are sort of laying out is that as Congress becomes more involved in foreign policy, which they have since the Vietnam War, they say that the Vietnam War was a critical turning point, essentially, and that because of things like Watergate and the revelations they say of like controversial intelligence community activities, that sort of idea of the imperial presidency was sort of fought back against by Congress, and so they started to take more control over foreign policy, and so you see things like this no first use bill, or or Congress asserting more control over treaties, which DeLate and Scott talk about as well. Um, so yeah, so it's interesting to think about. I mean, as Congress becomes more involved in these processes, I think that we might start seeing more debate on foreign policy, more polarization on foreign policy, and these parties starting to take really hardline issues on issues of foreign policy in a way that they wouldn't have probably pre-Vietnam War, or definitely pre-World War II, when we had sort of the politics stopping at the water's edge. So yeah, I think that will be really interesting to look at in terms of this no first use bill. I think it's an interesting bill, and we'll see how that plays out.
Perfect.
Yeah.
But right now, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back to discuss that some more.
This is Duncan O'Rourke. I'm encouraging everyone to come to the Top 40 Rock Countdown, Fairfield University. It's going on at the Quick Center at 7:30, and tickets are $6 for students, $10 general admission. It's a great cause. Wednesday, May 1st, so I think you should all check it out. Hey, so we're back. Talk about no first use policy in foreign affairs, and we're fielding questions for Dan.
So, about this no first use bill.
Yeah.
Bill.
Yep.
Would the provision include any like requirement on the part of like the other country, like North Korea, so that like they couldn't like strike first either?
Right. Yeah. So there's obviously no law that we can make, obviously, that would control like what North Korea could do or not. But I think that's sort of the sentiment that first article that I was talking about from 2017 was mentioning. I think that ideally that would be the idea, is that we have this idea of no first use for ourselves, so that we know that we can't that we won't use nuclear missiles to initiate a war. And so that way I feel like it'll be easier to make these deals with countries like North Korea, because they know that we'll hold up our end of the bargain, because it's a law. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I feel like it just gives us legitimacy in that sort of stage, like that debate.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So I actually have a question.
Yep.
You were talking about polarization, obviously, in America.
Yeah.
And how it has stopped at the water's edge before.
Yeah.
What do you think? I know there's. I'm not sure if there's polls out on this about the No First Use Act yet, but what do you think the majority of America would think about this? Do you think they'd be on board?
I think this seems like something that most Americans might agree with, but I know, like I said, because it's Congress and it's sort of
right.
a polarized institution. There has been pushback on the bill. I think it was introduced in January of this year, and it was referred to committee. I can't find all that much information on it online. Besides that, even like the contents of the bill were a little hard for me to find. But yeah, I think, ideally, maybe I would like to get your thoughts on it too. But I don't know what exactly about this bill would be. I guess you would say that maybe what's the point of having nuclear weapons if you can't threaten people with them? Maybe that's the argument that Republicans. This is obviously Elizabeth Warren's a Democrat, so you could call this a Democratic bill. I would assume that Republican pushback might be, the purpose of having these nuclear weapons isn't to use them; it's to threaten people with them, and you can't threaten people with them if you have a no first use policy. But what do you think? Do you think people would support this?
I think it would be generally supported. That it's definitely a solid argument by the other side. The deterrent factor of it.
Yeah. So what do you think? What do you think about the bill in general? Do you think it's it would help? Do you think it'd be good and like to improve defense?
Um, well, I mean, it certainly wouldn't hurt. I mean, I don't know just how much it would help because, people, I mean, even if we had this rule, that doesn't mean we couldn't break it at some point, but, and, it doesn't really, I mean, North Korea could still attack us, but yeah, I guess it would help. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because to play devil's advocate, like on one side, it might give us more leverage to make that agreement with North Korea, but it also gives them leverage to just break it and not fear that sort of retaliation. I think that would be the main concern with this bill is that as the United States is sort of viewed as a police power on the international stage, and I feel like maybe people might think that this would restrict our ability to sort of be that police presence.
Right. It's restricting our biggest gun, so to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So I think we're going to, Stella, what's your next segment you're going to be bringing up?
I'm going to be discussing the paradox of Congress's historical. I mean, Congress has been historically unpopular, yet re-election rates for incumbents remain extremely high. And so I'm going to be talking about that as well as the discrepancy between re-election rates for incumbents in the House and that of the Senate.
Awesome. Great. So we'll be right back. We're going to talk a lot about that. Welcome back to the Congress Pod. We're going to be talking to Stella now. Stella's going to tell us about the paradox between low approval ratings but high re-election ratings.
Okay, so it's no secret that Congress has historically been very unpopular with the American public. Um, it varies from year to year and sometimes even month to month, but approval for the job that Congress as a whole is doing usually hovers around 15 to 20%, sometimes lower, sometimes a little bit higher. Yet it appears that despite this, Americans seem to, despite disliking Congress as a whole, like their individual Congress members. Surveys show that about 60% of constituents approve of the job that their Congress people are doing. And in addition, in 2016, 97% of House incumbents seeking re-election won their seat, as did 93% of Senate incumbents.
Wow.
Now, 2018 re-election rates were somewhat lower. I think it was 91% in the House and 84% in the Senate, but that's still relatively high. And many have wondered why it is that there's this discrepancy. Well, there are many theories, but one of the main ones is that and part of it could be that obviously if somebody voted for someone, I mean obviously you vote for your own congressperson but not the other people's congresspersons, so it could be just that they approved them because they voted for them, and or that they got voted in because their constituents liked them.
Right, that makes sense.
And so, but another theory is that they are more likely to be exposed to their own congresspeople in a positive way. That they're more likely to have exposure to them and see them as an actual person as opposed to just a part of an institution. And it's easier to dislike an entire institution than it is to dislike a single person.
Right.
But it could, and part of the reason that incumbents have such high re-election rates in general, even besides the fact that their constituents seem to like them overall, is that they have name recognition. They have access to advertising. Like there's the ranking privilege,
Yep.
and they also have there's also constituent services they offer that tend to foster that tend to give them a good image among their constituents. And,
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that although reelection rates for incumbents are high in both the House and the Senate, they're almost always higher in the House, and I find this discrepancy very interesting, and so do a lot of people. Gary Jacobson, who wrote a book titled "The Politics of Congressional Campaigns," touched on this a lot, and one of the things that he gave many reasons as to why reelection rates for incumbents in the House are so much higher than they are in the Senate. And one of the main reasons he gave was that because states are usually much longer, usually much larger and more populous than individual districts,
Yeah.
they are naturally less homogenous,
Mhm.
which makes it more likely that there will be a seesawing of the dominant party depending on who turns out to vote.
Right.
Jacobson notes in his book that virtually every state is potentially winnable by either party.
Yeah.
But the same could not be said of, because, when you think about an individual district, they tend to be like, because people tend to cluster together, like the same types of people tend to live in the same sorts of districts.
Mhm.
Also, the Senate is seen as being more prestigious, and thus the candidates that, seek election against the incumbents are, of a higher caliber, and are more like well known, and also it's because they're more competitive, and so it's just sort of something that like feeds on itself, like they're more competitive, so they're more highly funded, so, and which in turn makes them even more competitive. Um, In addition, senators are more likely to receive, they get more publicity. So, and that means that they're more likely to get, negative publicity than House members who kind of like stay under the radar, which may affect their chances for reelection.
Right. Great.
Also, something that Jacobson did not touch on, but is nonetheless a factor in this, is that House terms are only 2 years, while Senate terms are 6, and so naturally there's more likely to be a change in public opinion over that period of time than there would be during a 2-year period, which makes it more likely that they will be voted out of office.
Great. Awesome. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and discuss this some more.
Perfect.
Do you have free time, millions of dollars laying around, and a hatred of compromising? Then you should join the United States Congress today. As a member of the United States Congress, you will be able to mark up bills, write bills, debate, filibuster, be filibustered, and ultimately have all of your work vetoed by the President of the United States. United States Congress, announce your exploratory committee today. All right, so we are back. We're talking about the discrepancy between reelection rates and approval ratings, and I think Duncan had a question for Stella.
Right. So I was just wondering, Stella, like over the years, about the actual approval ratings of Congress. If you could elaborate, possibly.
Oh, well, the most recent poll that was conducted by Gallup showed that roughly 20% approve of how Congress is handling its job, while 77% disapprove,
Right.
and a very small percentage of 3% have no opinion.
Okay.
Historically, it has hovered, well, in recent years, it has hovered from around 15 to 20%, but
Oof.
a few years back, it reached a low of roughly 11%.
What year was that?
That was 2015.
Okay.
Wow.
And there have been times where it has been a lot higher and times where it has been very low. Like after 9/11, it was 84%, but obviously that was a historical anomaly.
Huh. That's interesting.
Right. Yeah. I guess it makes sense though that after, a sort of tragedy, the nation is more patriotic and about their the institutions. But I mean, 84% is high.
Yeah.
Like I wonder what that jump was between like what it was when their last poll to the 84%.
Yeah.
Actually, right before it was I can in the poll conducted from September 7th through 10th, so like a couple days before 9/11, it was actually only 42%, and then the next month it was 84%.
Yeah.
So.
Wow.
That's impressive.
Yeah, that's a big jump. So I guess my question would be, like, do you think there is any way to, sort of fix this issue where Congress as a whole is not functional, but its individuals are still being supported? And I guess the solution probably would be just to, have people be elected who are the best candidates and not necessarily, related to these factors of like party or anything like that. Do you guys think there's any way to do that though? Or do you think it's always just going to be, I voted for this person, so I support them, I'm going to vote for them again?
That's a really tough question to answer. I mean, there.
Was that?
Yeah,
did you make the money sign?
Right. I feel like a lot of people of possible good candidates could be restricted because of costs.
Yeah.
I know you, Stella, were talking about the cost around. Earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
I think finance probably plays an interesting part in it. And I think like voter fatigue, interestingly, I feel like because I feel like if you're really tired of an election season, you know what I'm saying, that last as long as the ones in the United States do, you might just be like, I'm just going to vote for the person who's already in office or the person I voted for before,
right,
or the person who aligns with my party.
Yeah.
So maybe if we were to shorten the length of like have an actual restriction on when you can start campaigning and when you can start raising money, like some European countries do, that might like decrease voter fatigue and increase the maybe voter participation in general. But probably I think people would make more informed choices and actually be more involved in doing research and things like that, because I think people just get tired of our elections.
Right.
I know I do personally. So great. I think that's gonna do it for the Congress Pod today. So thank you for joining us, and we will be back. Thanks.